Boys are a diverse group. They don't all suffer the same levels of disadvantage. And in taking boys seriously, we use this term compounded educational disadvantage with the analogy of a backpack loaded with bricks. So the more bricks, for example, you have in your backpack, the harder it is for a boy to succeed. I'm joined here by Andrew Hamilton, who is the Research Associate on the Taking Boys Seriously research. So just for a bit of context, Taking Boys Seriously is a participatory action research project. It's building on research published by Ken Harland and Sam McCready in 2012. And we've just come to the end of a 5-year cycle. We've recently received funding for a further 5 years, we're delighted to say. So by the end of this research project, we'll have been working for over 20 years to enhance the experience of boys in education. So it's quite substantial. There's a few things that we want you to take away from today. One of them is it's important to say, and I think listening to Catherine, who just spoke before us, that all social science research is contested and contestable, and particularly when you're talking about gender and education. So there are some similarities to what we will say and to what you heard from Catherine, and there's also some differences in what we've found. We also want you to take away the importance of relational education as an approach, a particular approach for work with boys. The necessity to be gender conscious in educational practice, and the importance of impacting on the entire ecosystem to transform a long-term systemic problem, including the need for collaboration and the shift in educational culture. You're also hopefully going to have, if we have time, the opportunity to hear directly from the boys. I've made a 3-minute video and they tell you about some of their experiences of it. And as always, the voice of the boys is the most powerful one that you will hear. So what's the problem that Taking Boys Seriously is trying to address? We know that boys, particularly those from poor communities, are doing less well than girls. At all levels of education. It's an international phenomenon, including the UK and Ireland. And the problem with boys' underachievement is long-term and systemic, and there are multiple reasons as to why it may be the case. And Mike, you just referred to those. There's mountains of data and research that can tell us about this. Boys are a diverse group. They don't all suffer the same levels of disadvantage. And in Taking Boys Seriously, we use this term compounded educational disadvantage with the analogy of a backpack loaded with bricks. So the more bricks, for example, you have in your backpack, the harder it is for a boy to succeed. In Northern Ireland, these bricks might be connected to poverty, to post-conflict masculinities, and to a selective education system. But this differs from region to region. The result is largely the same, however, and boys from those poorer communities have persistently worse educational outcomes. So what do we do? For us, it was important that our research was actively making a difference, as Mike has said. In TBS, we decided we wanted to do research that would make some real sustainable change, not another report to sit on another shelf, listing the same set of problems that we already know. And we know to make real change to a long-term systemic issue, we need to impact on the entire educational ecosystem. So the solution lies not just with one of us, but with all of us. That's schools, leaders, teachers, classroom assistants, parents, youth services, community projects, early years, higher education, policymakers, and ultimately boys themselves. The way we put it is that everybody has a gift that they can bring. And if we all do that thing that is within our gift and do it intentionally and collectively, real change can and will happen. It's also very important to us that we counter the damage and negative narrative of problem boys. In other words, if we keep telling working class boys that they're underachievers, that they're failures, that they're violent, that they're problematic, then what do we expect is going to happen? This requires that we change the way we speak to boys and how we speak about boys, and then in turn, how boys view and speak about themselves. So in TBS, we use participatory action research. We do this because it helps us to impact on pedagogy, how we understand education, and also in practice, how we're doing education. It fosters ownership of the research, which was very important, far beyond the research team and the university itself. And alongside the changes we make to pedagogy and practice, we are simultaneously building up an evidence base that can influence policy direction as well. So we began by partnering with community-based projects in schools, and using 6 case studies, we asked what we call a different question. So rather than once again ask what the problem is, we asked what's helpful. We asked what's really working rather than what's not. And essentially we talked to the real experts, and that's boys and their educators. We interrogated great practice, which enabled us in 2021 to cultivate an education approach underpinned by 10 principles of education. And you can see those hopefully coming up on the PowerPoint now. So those 10 principles of education range right from recognising the primacy of relationship through to identifying blocks to boys' learning, through to engaging meaningfully with boys and valuing the voice of boys. There are 10 of them. I'm not going to go through them one by one, but if you want more detail on the principles, you can find them on our TBS website, with a definition of the principle itself, the key research finding that supports it, and also indicators of success reported by the boys themselves. That's at ulster.ac.uk/PBS. I can send that through. Between 2021 and 2022, as part of the research then, these principles were used intentionally by a number of schools and other educational contexts so that we could test this idea of relational culture within education. As part of the testing, we engaged with 22 post-primary schools, with 4 EOTAS education other than schools centres, 10 youth work settings, and with our own university as well. The educators put the 10 principles into practice in over 12 weeks and facilitated a range of data collection with the boys. In addition, 442 boys and 108 educators completed surveys. And examples from the surveys include things like 85% of the boys say they're more likely to learn when they know that their voice and views are valued in an educational context. 79% of boys agree or strongly agree that when they have a good relationship with their educator, they're more likely to learn. 76% of them agreed or strongly agreed that they learn better when educators believe in their ability to do well. And you can see there are some crossovers here with Catherine, but maybe the language is framed slightly differently. And 91% of the educators believe that fostering positive relationships is core to their practice. Despite those claims, though, educators across the schools, alternative education projects and youth settings report that relational education is not prioritised and remains underdeveloped. A quote from one of our educators states that the skill of building relationships is not valued enough, even within initial teacher training. Development of relationships and then maintaining relationships is highly skilled, and that there's no emphasis on trying to make people better at it or assist them being able to better support it. So the TBS research to date spans over 17 years, and that includes the earlier study by Harlan McCready, published in 2012. And within that time, consistently a core finding has been the need to enhance relational approaches within education. Multiple definitions of relational pedagogy exist. So rather than a fixed definition, we propose several characteristics that boys and educators report are central to their relational approach. So one of these, relational education positions the teacher and student relationship at the heart of learning. And when relationships are prioritised, boys report being more motivated, having an increased sense of belonging and feeling more comfortable seeking personal and emotional support. We found that working intentionally to ensure all pupils feel seen, known and heard is core to a growing culture of relational education. And Catherine made some points that pointed to that as well in her school. Relational education is highly interpersonal. It focuses on the educator's skills and competencies to build trust and empathy, and to ensure boys' voices are heard and valued. And such primacy of relationships is not always straightforward, so it requires a commitment and a perseverance. But arguably, and I think some of the questions earlier on pointed this as well, arguably relational education is important for all young people. So why particularly for boys? We found that relational education engages with the cultural contexts that shape boys' identities. So for boys growing up in areas of relative poverty, they are, as one educator put it, constantly trying to catch up with their more affluent peers. They have to work twice as hard to get what others have. And in relation to gender, as boys transition through adolescence, They counter multiple contradictions about masculinity and what it means to be a man. So boys will feel pressure to be powerful, to be strong, to be brave, to be intelligent, to be healthy, to be mature, and to be in control. But in reality, when you ask them about it, they report feeling powerless, they report feeling weak or fearful or felt stupid in school or dismissed by adults, and they can neglect their emotional and physical and mental health. Suppressing emotions and hiding behind that mask is repeatedly identified as a barrier for boys and young men in education and has a negative impact on their mental health and well-being. And as boys make sense of gender expectations and equally feel the effects of their social inequality, they can express a whole range of behaviours in school which may appear as compliance or defiance or passiveness or resistance. So the 10 Taking Boys Seriously principles are a framework for unmasking masculinities, affirming a whole spectrum of ways of being masculine, of inviting boys to embrace and understand emotion, of holding up a mirror to attitudes and behaviours which may prevent them and others from achieving the very things that they really want, which is to have a voice, to feel valued, to be treated fairly, to be shown dignity and respect. So engaging intentionally in this way can occur in the moment by checking in with boys or by challenging or unpacking sexist or homophobic attitudes or behaviours, or in more strategic ways using creative approaches in classrooms that establish environments of informality and encourage openness and space for discussion around values and reflection on what it means to be a man. Relational education is mindful of power dynamics and seeks to rebalance systems of power in educational settings. And this is probably where we mostly diverge from what Catherine was saying. It's connected to themes of masculinity where exerting dominance is a core and popular conception of masculinity. So Podrick, one of the boys we spoke to, captured a common frustration among boys. He talked about always being roared at by teachers. Being roared at doesn't lead to meaningful or lasting change in attitudes and behaviours. Rather, engaging meaningfully with boys involves talk-based strategies where challenge and accountability are balanced with affirmation and empathy and opportunities to rebuild trust. Balance is also achieved through facilitating peer learning, creating opportunities for pupils to learn from each other. A year ahead, I've lost my way here. A year ahead reported to us that engaging with the TBS principals led her to carve out time for such peer learning after finding out that boys, in her words, said there's nowhere actually for them to troubleshoot their own academic problems. They're not allowed to do it in the study hall. They said, Miss, there's nowhere for us to do this. We're not allowed to talk. So sometimes what a boy needs is relatively simple and can be done within the classroom setting or in a series of conversations over time, things like nurturing or listening or understanding or affirming or guiding or coaching. And finally, relational education is particularly effective. We're embedded within collaborative partnerships between schools and communities and youth services, for example. And a great example of one of those partnerships is that of Abbey Community College in Newtonabbey in Belfast, and a local youth project called Monkstown Boxing Club. And each year, the year 11 pupils are given opportunities to engage a project called In Your Corner, which involves a split timetable between the school and the boxing club. Marcus and Jay, here in the video, are superb advocates and speak very openly about their experiences of education and the importance of the 10 TBS principles. And we just want to play you the video. It's only 3 minutes long and you'll hear the voice of boys themselves.